The textbook explains several types of sampling techniques. In other words, several ways we describe the group of people who actually participated in the research. When we see phrases like probability sampling methods and non-probability sampling methods, it sounds pretty technical, but I think you'll find the reasons we care about sampling are pretty common sense, and hopefully that'll help you make sense of the technical terms if they were challenging. We'll be looking at a few sections of the worksheet to understand sampling and why we care. These sections help us think about the related concepts and what they mean when we're designing a study or thinking about the knowledge we gained from a study. In either case, designing or understanding your results, we need to start by thinking about the population of interest, or the large group that the researcher and reader are interested in. The population isn't typically stated directly in the article, so we won't be able to use a keyword search to find it. Instead, we'll need to look at the title, abstract, and the focus to use inductive reasoning. In other words, we'll use that information to make an educated guess. I use the term recruiting to refer to the process the researchers use to actually gather their participants, identifying potential participants, letting them know about the opportunity to participate, communicating about what would be involved, and so forth. Those processes are how the sample is actually compiled. Part of the reason we're concerned with the process of recruiting participants and the type of sample that results is because that influences how confident we can be about our claims about the population. The formal way to talk about that is that sampling influences the representativeness of the sample, or the degree to which the participants in the study represent the group of people we're trying to understand. Looking at the specific characteristics of the sample for a study can help us understand that more realistically than we might just from looking at the terms in the textbook. Like I mentioned, authors don't always directly tell us the population of interest, so we often need to make an educated guess given what we learned about the purpose of the research. We already have the title, abstract, and information about the focus in the worksheet. For the Burton King article, the abstract does mention undergrads, but it also specifically said that was the sample. The title and the goal of the study don't mention undergraduates, and doesn't say the health benefits for undergraduates or examines the implications for undergraduates. It doesn't really say anything specific about who they're interested in learning about, so we'd assume the population of interest was people in general. APA style usually makes finding information about participant recruitment fairly easy, especially compared to figuring out the population, because it's typically included in the participants section, and we know where that's included in the sequence of sections. It's also usually labeled with participants. When you're working with electronic files, you might be able to use the find function to search for the word participants and find it pretty easily. That can also help when the journal uses a different style for headings, because we frequently use the word participants in describing the sample. In Burton King, that information is on page 154, or the 5th page of the PDF file. When we find the section that should include the information about how they recruited participants, we need to skim to find the specific details. Remember, the idea is we're trying to figure out how they got people to participate. In this case, we get the idea from the phrase about participation in an introductory psychology course. That tells us they contacted participants by making students in the class aware of the study and offering credit for participation. That information, combined with what we already decided about the population, allows us to determine the sampling method. First, we can ask, did this approach allow everyone in the population? In this case, did it allow all people to be included? In this case, you're probably saying a pretty strong no, which is accurate and makes it a non-probability sample. Then we can look at the methods in that category to determine the specific sampling method. Since there isn't any indication they were being purposive or they had students ask other students to participate, we would say this is a convenient sample. We can usually find the information about the sample characteristics in the same section where we found the recruitment information. You might have instinctively moved ahead adding that information in the worksheet. The information about how many participants there were, how many of each gender, age, and ethnic representation is identified pretty clearly. You'll want to add that information to the related sections of the worksheet if you haven't already. The idea behind the other relevant characteristics is that the author usually tells us something about the sample, other than gender, age, and ethnicity, that seems like it would have influenced the findings. In this case, that might also be relatively straightforward. The fact that they were all enrolled in an introductory psychology class and needed to use the health center as their primary source of health care could both influence the representativeness of the sample, so they're important to note. The notes for these sections of the worksheet are fairly short, but provide a helpful reference when we're thinking about what we know based on the study. If you haven't already done so, please pause the recording to open your files for the Burton and King article, the PDF and the Word file with the worksheet, and add the information from the previous slides. When we think about what we know from the study, we need to think about the limitations. The idea is to make sure we're thinking about it in an accurate way, as a possibility rather than a rule or a concrete fact. It probably makes sense when we think about people. There are so many variations, it doesn't seem practical to identify too many things that are the same for everybody. So we look for patterns that might help us understand a large group or a large portion of the population. The idea of the representativeness section of the worksheet isn't to lead you to the conclusion that the study is worthless, just to help you think about the context for the findings. In this case, the fact that they're all college students and the mean age helps us realize these findings might not apply to older individuals. The fact that they're in introductory psychology might make them more interested in mental health and more likely to participate in a way that would strengthen the findings. And the fact they have regular access to health care at the health center might mean their overall health is better than other individuals. When you pause the slide to add your notes, you might notice that I have my own form of shorthand I use for this section. It's actually what I hope to see in your worksheet, because it tends to indicate you thought more about the ideas than you would if you just typed or copied and pasted phrases from the article. Since the Hurst article is in a content analysis, some of our notes for these sections will be quite a bit different than they would be for other types of studies. But it helps us really think about each concept and the ideas it represents so we can decide if there is related information. Population information is pretty straightforward. The title and purpose both emphasize that the researchers are interested in stressors influencing college students. At first glance, it seems like the Hurst article might not include information about recruitment and sampling because it doesn't include a participants section. If we think about the idea behind this section, though, we can look a little closer for related to information. When we're thinking about recruitment, we're asking ourselves, how did the researchers connect with the people who provided data? The researchers for this study didn't connect with people directly, but they somehow made a connection to get data so we can look for the parallel information. When we think about it that way, the information in the last half of the first paragraph and the first part of the second paragraph seem to relate. Some of the information is more detailed than we need. The portions I highlighted give enough information to put the findings in context. The article does include a section labeled Sample Characteristics, though it's in the results section instead of the method, which fits with the design of the study, as does the fact that they don't report information like gender or age of participants. The table they refer to really only includes the location where the data was collected, which is different than ethnicity. In other words, we don't have any information that fits with the sample characteristics section of the worksheet. It seems important to note that the majority of the studies were conducted in the United States, though. We might question whether college students are different in other countries or whether colleges are different in other countries, and therefore the students might have different stressors. It's a question that relates to the representativeness of the data, so we can note that there. This is what I included in my notes about the Hurst article. Now that you've learned about the process and seen my model, use the PDF file of the Hurst article to complete the population, sampling, and representativeness sections of that worksheet. Then, look at the Schifrin and Nelson article and complete those sections of the worksheet for that article. It's a quantitative article, so you can use the strategies we learned about from Burton and King for that worksheet. You might have noticed the notes for this article were pretty similar to those for Burton and King. It's pretty common for researchers in psychology to use students from introductory to psychology as participants. You might see that referred to as a subject pool. The examples we've looked at reported one number for the sample size, but that's not always the case. It's actually interesting that Burton and King only reported one number. When a study requires more than one session or more than one time to participate for each person, it's pretty common for some participants to drop out. The researchers frequently include the number of participants in each session so we can keep that in mind when interpreting the results. Sometimes the difference from one session to another are big enough to make us wonder if something about the research made participants uncomfortable, and if so, what that might mean about the variable, the procedure, and the results. To wrap this up, we can think about this section of our notes from two perspectives: how we find the information and what it's telling us. The structure of the worksheet and your knowledge of APA style help with finding the information. Then you can use your knowledge about research to do a little logical analysis to decide on other relevant characteristics and representativeness. Collectively, this information helps us understand the context for the findings. It reminds us that we can't say something like relationships are the most common source of stress for most people based on the Hurst article, because the Hurst article only looked at studies about college students.